كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم. أما بعد. Hope everyone's doing well. So we continue with our from where we kind of left off last session, which was we kind of looked into the life and times of Imam Ash-Shafi'i. We kind of touched upon his academic journey from where he was born to Mecca to Medina to Iraq then to Egypt, and his engagement with Imam Malik, and then as becoming a student of Imam Malik, and then engaging with Imam Muhammad ibn Hasan al-Shaybani. We also looked at the development of the Qadim versus the Jadid. So the Qadim madhab of Imam Shafi'i, which was transmitted predominantly by four figures: Imam Ahmed, Abu Thawr, Qarabisi, etc. And then the madhab al-Jadid, which was transmitted by the likes of Rabi' ibn Sulaiman, al-Muzani, and others. The book of Ibn Kitab al-Umm of Ash-Shafi'i, how central it is to understanding Imam Ash-Shafi'i. What also made Imam Shafi'i so significant was the fact that he took on the Ahlul Ra'i on the terms of he took on the Ahlul Ra'i based upon their terms. So he challenged the Ahlul Ra'i, right, based upon their terms as well. Not only did he defend so he kind of allowed the scholars of Hadith, or the Ahlul Hadith rather, to present a strong fiqhi consistent case against the Hanafis or Ahlul Ra'i, and so that kind of gave why he was kind of presented as a hero amongst the Muhaddithin because of that. But something that's important to know that we're going to just highlight in the beginning of the session as well, inshallah, is that what was the rank of Imam Shafi'i in the field of Hadith? Right, what was the rank of Imam Shafi'i in the field of Hadith? We'll touch upon that, and we're going to also go into some of the major figures within the Shafi'i madhab and books, and as we did with the Maliki madhab, just a brief, touching upon some of the key books. Again, this is far from comprehensive. Our purpose is not any of that. Our purpose is just to get like a brief understanding of some of the works within the Shafi'i madhab, inshallah. The question that I was kind of alluding to there was, what was the rank of Imam Shafi'i amongst the Muhaddithun? When we're talking about a rank amongst the Muhaddithun, there's two things that you can refer back to. One is the rank in terms of as a narrator of Hadith. So as a narrator of Hadith, Imam Shafi'i was without a doubt a trustworthy narrator. There's no doubt or any question mark regarding that when it comes to him. So if Imam Shafi'i transmits a narration, there is no objection to that. There is a popular debate amongst the Muhaddithun, which is known as what is Asahul Asanid, what's the most authentic chain. With Imam Bukhari and others, and this is probably the more popular position, is that it comes back to the chain of Abdullah bin Umar from the chain will be Imam Malik from Nafi' from Abdullah bin Umar. So that chain is considered as one of the best chains, Asahul Asanid, by the likes of Imam Bukhari, and it's a very common position that numerous scholars hold. And then from there, when discussing what's the most trustworthy chain, if you carry on with that, who's the best narrator from Imam Malik? So then here there was a debate, but numerous ulama preferred that Imam Shafi'i was the best transmitter from, or the best transmitter from Imam Malik. Some adding Ibn Wahab or Ka'anabi maybe, but Imam Shafi'i considered by many as being the greatest. And then from Imam Shafi'i was Imam Ahmed, and this is the chain that they say that Asahul Asanid then becomes Imam Ahmed from Imam Shafi'i, from Imam Malik, from Nafi', from Abdullah bin Umar radiyallahu anhu. So that becomes the Asahul Asanid. The only problem with this is that there's only about one or two narrations that have this chain. There's only one or two narrations, although it becomes a theoretical great chain. But in the real, in terms of actual narrations to that effect, there isn't much to go off. Now, the second point that you need when you talk about the rank as a person amongst the Muhaddithun, meaning what was Imam Shafi'i's rank as an Imam of Jarh wa Ta'deel? So Jarh wa Ta'deel, for those who are not aware, it refers to narrator disparagement and praise. So in the field of isnad, you get a narrator, and then you have imams of hadith that analyze their narrations, analyze their life, and they make observations about them. So they will say he's trustworthy, or he's truthful, he's weak, he was truthful but he has a bad memory, and there's a whole host of, it's a spectrum where they could kind of fall into, from being extremely trustworthy to being a absolute liar. So in terms of Imam Shafi'i's rank amongst the Muhadithun as being an Imam of Jarh wa Ta'dil, another term they use here is Naqid. A Naqid, meaning who's an expert who can distinguish between authentic and weak. In terms of that, Imam Shafi'i was not considered from the Nuqad. Let me clarify this. Nuqad in terms of someone who did extensive Jarh wa Ta'dil. So if you go through narrators, you're not going to find Imam Shafi'i constantly mentioned as saying so-and-so is thiqa, so-and-so is da'if. Rather, he kind of took what the experts around him had said, even narrations where he kind of takes from Imam Ahmed, even though he was his junior, and then based upon that does his fiqh. So of course, when it comes to transmission, very accurate, knows a whole host of hadith. But in terms of Jarh wa Ta'dil, he did not engage himself so much with that. And this is just the reality of it. If you look at all the great nuqad, so let's say like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, because Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was clearly from the nuqad, the expert in terms of Jarh wa Ta'dil, but then if you compare Imam Ahmad's fiqhi contribution, his fiqhi acumen, then I'm pretty sure most objective observers will say that Imam Shafi'i was greater than Imam Ahmad when it comes to his fiqhi acumen. We look into Imam Ahmad, you see some of the question marks that scholars had made early on, whether you should even count Imam Ahmad's fiqh as a alternative madhab to the four, or to the other madahib. So and the reason for that is because of it's a simple reality. It's time. That one of the reasons that a person becomes takhassus, which is specialization, requires dedication and time into a field. Without dedication and time into a field, a person very rarely gets to the level of expertise. And expertise requires a lot of time, a lot of dedication. So therefore, usually a person is only an expert in a one or few sciences. And so to become an expert in, let's say, ilm al-hadith, which is gathering narrators, let's just give you a brief example of how you kind of work out if a narrator is trustworthy or not. Contrary to how people sometimes present the science of hadith, it's not about whether the person is, praying salah or not. Those kind of stuff although are mentioned, but a lot of these are private affairs where a person doesn't really go in to try to find out what they're up to. Usually, how you kind of you try to work out whether a narrator is trustworthy or not is that you get their hadith. So you get the hadith of a narrator, you present it, you look at it. So let's say I get Zayd, and I say, okay, what are all the hadith of Zayd? So I look at all the hadith of Zayd. So let's say there's 100 of them, and I say, well, who does Zayd narrate from? So let's say Zayd narrates from Bakr. So Bakr would usually have other students. So I would say, okay, Zayd has 20 narrations on Bakr out of the 100, and is there anyone else other than Zayd who narrates from Bakr? He says, yes, Bakr has another student called Khalid. So, okay, now let's compare Zayd's narration to Khalid's narrations, or his other students. Let's see other students. Let's compare Bakr's narration, so Zayd's narration, to other narrations from Bakr, and then you try to compare. You see, right, is there anyone that's an odd one out? Is there anything strange that's being mentioned? At the same time, you're looking at Adala as well. So is there any question mark about his character? You're looking at that as well. But the main focus here is about the narrations of Zayd and how they corroborate or don't corroborate, and what are the idiosyncrasies, the unique features of them. If there's too many standout points, there's too many additions, too many subtractions, then that puts a question mark on Zayd's narrations. Now you can start to imagine how time consuming that is because of the sheer number of narrators that are out there. Right? How time consuming that is with the sheer number of narrators that are out there, and how meticulous a person has to be, because we realize that in the real world, a person can sometimes go through phases in life. So sometimes it's a phase of meticulousness. And then, like, sometimes we think back in that time saying, oh, when I was in madrasa, I was so particular with the way I do with my time or with note taking. Now in my 40s, I'm more carefree. People go through those phases. So therefore, the muhaddithun will start to note saying, okay, when Zayd narrates from Bakr, that's fine. But when Zayd was narrating from Amr, there's a question mark there. And this is very common. You see scholars say that so-and-so when he narrates from these people it's fine, but from these people it's not so fine. This is not based upon theological affiliations, contrary to what people think. People think that the people that they like, they said they're trustworthy. If you're Sunni, you're trustworthy. If you're Mu'tazili, they'll discard you. If you're Shi'i, they'll discard you. Whereas when you look at the reality of the science of hadith, it's far from that. And this is why you don't see Imam Shafi'i's name pop up that much amongst the likes of Yahya Ma'in or Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, not because he lacked knowledge, but it's because he did not dedicate himself as much into that field. Okay. Now, some of the books of the Shafi'i madhab, I'm just going to quickly mention that Sheikh Saif al-Asri notes, which kind of suggests that awareness should be considered of. Because he has a syllabus of what to study, and like I said, you can refer back to that if you're interested in studying the Shafi'i madhab properly. You can, maybe find a Shafi'i teacher who'll probably tell you rather than me telling you what the syllabus should be. But he just mentioned some important books. So he goes, كتب في التعريف بمذهب الشافعي. تولت طائفة من كتب التعريف بمذهب الشافعية ومن ذلك الفوائد المكية فيما يحتاجه طلبة الشافعية. So if you're looking for like an introductory book to the Shafi'i madhab, some of the works to keep an eye out for, he mentions is الفوائد المكية فيما يحتاج طلبة الشافعي by علامة علوي ابن أحمد السقاف الشافعي وقد اختصر مؤلف وقد طبع الأصل والمختصر. Then you got الفوائد المدنية في من يفتى بقوله من الشافعية. So if you're looking at who to give fatwa by in the Shafi'i madhab, there's a book written by Allam Muhammad bin Sulaiman al-Kurdi, which is useful for that. You also have Al-Madkhal ila Madhab al-Imam Shafi'i by Dr. Akram Yusuf Umar al-Qawasimi, which published Dawud Nafais, which was actually a PhD dissertation published into a work. So it's a Madkhal into the Shafi'i madhab. You also have Al-Madhab in the Shafi'iyya by Muhammad Tayyib ibn Muhammad al-Yusuf al-Yusuf, published Darul Bunyan. And then the fifth work he mentions سلم متعلم محتاج إلى معرفة رموز المنهاج, which is by فقيه محقق السيد أحمد ميقري الشميلي الأهدل. These are very useful works which introduce a person to the madhab. Another work I'll add to this is it's by Sheikh Ahmed Salim, called the names are coming to my mind right now. It's basically a book where he collects the relevant works in each science. Right? It's called I've got the first part of the name. I'll find it in a second. I'll let you know, inshallah. The book that I was referring to is called As-Subul al-Mardiyya لطالب علوم الشرعية by Sheikh Ahmed Salim. You'll find a soft copy of this online. So just last thing I just want to quickly mention as just a brief intro. So we spoke about the first founding point of the Shafi'i madhab in terms of the ta'sis wa nash'a between the madhab al-qadim and madhab al-jadid. A second stage that is noted here is he goes al-dhuhur al-tariqatayn shafi'iyya, where you end up having two methods that you find within the Shafi'i madhab. The first one is tusamma بطريقة العراقيين أو بغداديين, which is known as a method of the Iraqi or Baghdadi scholars, same school. لأن معظم سكن بغداد وما حولها. Because why is it called that? Because most of those scholars from this field this school lived in Baghdad or around it. وكان أول من أظهر مذهب الشافعي بالعراق بعد تلاميذ الشافعي هو الإمام أبو القاسم عثمان السعيد الأنماطي رحمه الله. So after the initial ashab of Imam Shafi'i, the one who spread his madhab in Iraq was Imam al-Anmati. وتبعه فيها تلميذ أبو العباس بن سريج وتلميذ القفال الشاشي الكبير حتى وصلت إلى أبي حامد إسفرايني. So these are very famous names, by the way, right? That kind of became the heads of the Shafi'is in Iraq. والذي انتهت إليه رئاسة المذهب الشافعي. So Abu Hamid الإسفرايني, who became the head of the Shafi'is in Baghdad. وامتاز طريقة العراقيين كما قال الإمام نووي واعلم أن نقل أصحابنا عراقيين نصوص الشافعي وقواعد مذهبي ووجوه متقدم أصحابنا أتقن وأثبت من نقل خراسانيين غالبا. So the Baghdadi school, as Imam Nawawi says, that when it comes to transmission from Imam Shafi'i, they were far more particular and meticulous than the Khurasani school, which we're going to mention next. The second method, if you like, tariqa of the Shafi'is was the Khurasani tariqa. وهي متأخرة عن طريقة العراقيين من حيث ظهور. This came apparent slightly later. So with the Iraqi school, it comes from the students of the students of Imam Shafi'i, this starts a bit later. It's also called the طريقة المراوزة لأن شيخهم ومعظم أتباعهم مراوزة, Marwazi basically, and sometimes called the Khurasaniyun, and sometimes مراوزة وهو عبارتان بمعنى the same thing they mean. The head of this is Abu Awana يعقوب بن إسحاق بن إبراهيم النيسابوري صاحب مستخرج على صحيح مسلم وقد أخذ عنه محافظ محمد بن علي الرازي وأبو القاسم الطبراني. So these are the he was a he's actually famous for his book on the Mustakhraj of Sahih Muslim. And Mustakhraj, for those who are not aware, is where you get a book of hadith and then you find alternative routes for those same hadith. So he done the Mustakhraj of Sahih Muslim. He's a very famous scholar, Abu Awana, but he was also a Shafi'i and from the Khurasani, or kind of the head of the Khurasani school, or the founder if you like. وكان من أعلام هذه الطريقة, the major imams from this method was Imam al-Qaffal al-Saghir, is Abu Bakr ibn Abdullah ibn Ahmad ibn Abdullah al-Marwazi, who is one of the senior Shafis of scholars of the age. You also have Imam Abu al-Qasim Abdul Rahman bin Muhammad al-Fawrani, and Imam Muhaqqiq Qadi Hussein bin Muhammad bin Ahmad al-Marwazi, Abu Muhammad al-Juwayni, Walid Abi Ma'ali. So you had basically Imam Juwayni, Abu Ma'ali Juwayni, his father. Imam Juwayni is the author of Ghiyathi and other many Shafi texts. So his father, and then Abu Hasan al-Mawardi. They were from the Khurasani school, he's saying. Imam Nawawi says, وَالْخُرَسَانِيُّونَ أَحْسَنُ تَصَرُّمًا وَبَحْثًا وَتَفْرِيعًا وَتَرْتِيبًا غَالِبًا. So Imam Nawawi, the way he kind of describes the two schools, he goes, the Baghdadis, when they come to transmission of the madhab, they were more clear, they're more particular, more meticulous. So if you want to do a naqal, you go to them. But when it comes to bahath, study and expanding, if you like, tafri', then there's the Khurasani school that were generally better. That's the observation that Imam An-Nawawi makes. So this is the two methods. So one is predominantly, or all doing the same thing, but one is predominantly better at precision transmission, and the other one is about bahth and taftish. And so this is the second stage is known as the ظهور الطريقتين, the appearance of the two methods. المرحلة الثالثة, the third stage, is تحرير المذهب. Right, تحرير المذهب. This is where you're unraveling, detailing the madhab. وهذه المرحلة قام بأعبائها الإمامان العلمان المحققان أبو القاسم عبد الكريم الرافعي والإمام أبو زكريا يحيى بن الشرف النووي. And Rafi'i passes away in the year 624 and Nawawi passes away in 676. And this is quite important because what you have before that is basically a range of opinions that are kind of scattered within the Shafi madhab. And so people are having their own tarjih. A Shafi scholar said, this is better, that's better. So there's a difficulty that you have now, that how do you navigate through this? What's the correct position to hold? All right. So it requires some senior authority figures to come along and say, this is the correct answer, this is more closer to truth, this is weaker, etc., etc. So the two imams that are known to have done that and gained that authority was Imam Rafi'i, who comes earlier, dies in 624 Hijri, and of course the famous Imam Nawawi rahimahullah, who dies in the year 676. Imam Nawawi, just like a point about him, is that everything he touched, say a person, everything that touched, it turns into gold. Imam Nawawi, everything he touched was accepted. So everyone wrote books on 40 hadith. His book of 40 hadith gains the most acceptance. Many scholars wrote compilations of hadith. His Riyadh al-Salihin gains the most acceptance. And so like that, Imam Nawawi's works, not just because of divine acceptance, and of course those signs of that are quite clear on the works of Imam Nawawi, but of course it was his precision, his accuracy, his fairness when it came to Nawawi that allowed him to gain. And of course he's from those ulama who never married and also passed away relatively young. So it shows about the great effort he makes. Imam Shihabuddin Ahmad al-Ramli, he comments about this stage. He says, وَمِنَ الْمَعْلُومِ أَنَّ الشَّيْخَيْنِ, what is known regarding the two sheikhs, meaning Al-Rafi and Nawawi, قد اجتهد في تحرير المذهب غاية اجتهاد. They made great effort, not talking about ijtihad in the istilah he says, meaning they made great effort in trying to clarify the madhab. ولهذا كانت عناية العلماء وإشارات من سبقنا من أئمة متوجهة إلى ما عليه شيخان والأخذ ما صححاه بالقبول والإذعان. Because this is why those who come after, they were looking for the places where Nawawi and Rafi'i have corrected. So if you get a place where Nawawi and Rafi'i both come to the same answer, then that was seen as what you rely upon in the madhab. So this is where you get the Rafi'i Nawawi acceptance. ومؤيدين لذلك بالدلائل والبرهان وإذا انفرد أحدهما عن الآخر فالعمل بما عليه النووي. And then the later Shafi'is, if there was a case where Rafi'i and Nawawi disagreed, then they would give preference to An-Nawawi. Now I'm pretty sure, again, if there was a Shafi'i in the room, who studied the Shafi'i madhab, they will probably turn around and say, oh, yeah, that may be generally correct, but some scholars did not accept that, or there may be certain cases where Rafi'i's tarjih were given preference, but he's just mentioning the general rule. The Nawawi was considered slightly above Rafi'i, but both of them agree that's a strong reason for one to give fatwa on that. And then finally, you have marhatu rabi'a. The fourth stage is marhatu istiqrar, where the madhab gets established. Where the madhab gets established in its final form. وهذه مرحلة قام بأعبائها الإمامان علمان محققان شهاب الدين أبو العباس أحمد محمد بن علي الهيتمي المصري المكي. This is Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, of course not to get confused with Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani dies in 852 Hijri. Ibn Hajar al-Haytami dies in 974. So Ibn Hajar al-Haytami is known for numerous works, even commentaries on his commentary on Mishkat al-Masabih was also published very recently as well, but numerous works on fiqh, and Fatawa Hadithiyya is his work. And Imam Shamsuddin Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Ramli al-Misri, who dies in year 1004 Hijri. So then he mentions here that the last stage, Marhatu Istiqrar, is where you have Ibn Hajar al-Haytami and Shihabuddin al-Ramli. They kind of represent the final stages of once we can kind of get a steady formed what the madhab is. So this is again, like we said, is a base structure. It's a base structure to get a very brief blueprint of how the madhab operates. Now, of course, within that there will always be complications, details, nuances that will be very important to know. But so these are some of the figures that a person should be considering. Then the Shaykh mentions, qawaid to keep an eye out for within the Shafi'i madhab, which they mention. So, for example, just give one. So, like al-mu'tamad, what is relied upon is what Nawawi and Rafi'i agree upon. For example, if the two Shaykh, one of them have not, mentioned something, what do you do then? Right, then Haytami gives, his preference. So this is basically the way we have the Tabaqat al-Fuqaha and Tabaqat al-Masail in the Hanafi madhab. It's their method of how the Muqallid Mufti is meant to navigate. Who are the authorities to take from? So if there's khilaf, for example, even between Ibn Hajar or someone else, right, or khilaf in Tuhfat al-Muhtaj or another work, what do you give preference to? That's something that is being highlighted within the Qawaid of the book. These are called the Qawaid for the Mufti Muqallid. Of course, some scholars who may not be, or might be of a higher degree, may not want to follow this too strictly, but every madhab has these kind of structures that are there that helps the Mufti Muqallid to navigate through. We mentioned some of them in the Hanafi madhab. The Shafi'i, the Malikis have it, and the Hanbalis also have it as well. Okay, that kind of brings us on to our, although the segment was we're trying to do over each madhab, but because last we kind of expanded a bit more, so instead of just trying to I think because there's sections in these works where they talk about istilahat within the madhab, rather than me sitting here and reading through it, it would probably be much more better to just read the work yourself. I don't want to go into, there are examples, not here but in other works, that you can kind of present, but then I think will be unnecessary delving a bit too deep, moving away from our purpose of these lessons is not to delve into the weeds of the madhab. So and probably a good time now to kind of move on to the Hanbali madhab, a brief intro regarding the Imam, and then the following session we'll look into some of the details regarding the Hanbali madhab, inshallah. So starting with for this we just talk a bit about his life, and I'll mention some comments about Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and the next session we'll look into the madhab a bit more, and there's some of the unique features. So therefore by the end of this we get to understand some of the unique features of the madhab, the way that it at least originates from. So like in the Maliki madhab you have the Muwatta, the Mudawwana, what these books were, some of the early transmitters of them, things to look out for. The Shafi madhab, you have Imam Shafi's Risala, you have his Kitab al-Umm, and how the basic schools you have of the Shafi madhab. And then the Hanbali madhab you have of course Imam Ahmed, and with him is the Masail of Imam Ahmed. So some things to note there inshallah, which we'll try to highlight. So Imam Ahmed, هو الإمام أبو عبد الله Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal ibn Hilal ibn Asad ibn Idris ibn Abdullah ibn Hayyan ibn Abdullah ibn Anas ibn Auf ibn Qasid ibn Maz ibn Shayban ibn Dhahd ibn Tha'laba ibn Uqaba ibn Sa'b ibn Ali ibn Bakr Wa'il al-Dhuhli al-Shaybani al-Marwazi ثم البغدادي أحد أئمة الأعلام. So this is Imam Ahmed. Just to note here, we say Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, but his actual father's name was Muhammad. So it's Imam Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Hanbal. Hanbal was his grandfather's name. So it's just just a general fact to keep a note on. He was born the year 164 Hijri. Born the year 164, and Imam Ahmed, he did briefly meet Imam Abu Yusuf. So like I said, we try to connect this to the Hanafi madhab because we try and look within that context. Imam Ahmed did meet Imam Abu Yusuf and did take from him. So 164 was the birth. So it's very early on in Imam Ahmed's life. And he passes away in the year 241, right? And of course, he is the famous Imam. He actually refers to him here as As-Sabir al-Mihna, Al-Nasir al-Sunnah, Shaykh al-Usaba, Muqtada Ta'ifa, ومن قال فيه الشافعي فيما رواه حرملة خرج من بغداد وما خلفت بها أفقى ولا أورع ولا أزهد ولا أعلم من أحمد. And the praise that Imam Ahmed mentioned, Imam Shafi'i already mentioned. Now the praise vice versa given by Imam Shafi'i, who was the senior to Imam Ahmed, but the great praise that he said that I left Baghdad and I left Baghdad and I didn't leave behind anyone more had more understanding, more piety, more zuhud, more knowledgeable than Imam Ahmad al-Hanbal. This great praise that Imam al-Shafi'i gave, and he calls him Sabir al-Mihna. Now, there's a few things to kind of note before we go into the seerah of Imam Ahmed. Maybe we'll spend this moment here to speak about this because it's very relevant to early Hanafi history, which is the Mihna, right? The Mihna. Now, what exactly is the Mihna? The Mihna has a massive impact upon how we view our Islamic intellectual history. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, who are the Imams, who are not the Imams, what is the orthodox position, what is unorthodoxy. A lot of this is kind of highlighted within the Mihna. Just to briefly kind of note what the Mihna is for those who are not aware. The Mihna was when Ma'mun, the Khalifa, takes the position which was advocated by the Mu'tazila that the Quran is makhluq. Now there are works written explaining why exactly Ma'mun was so forceful with this quite abstract theological position. Is the Quran makhluq or ghair makhluq? Why would a Khalifa be interested in such a theological discussion? Different theories are presented. One of them being is that the position by the because Ma'mun takes the Khilafah via a war with his brother Amin. So Baghdad was under the authority of the Muhaddithun. So when the Muhaddithun, their position has been that the Quran is غير مخلوق, and whoever says the Quran is makhluq, then in essence they've done some form of kufr, because the Quran is kalamullah and the sifat of Allah Ta'ala can't be makhluq. So this was a dangerous position. So when Ma'mun comes in and he sees the Muhaddithun holding such a position, then it's possible that he may have thought that because of the Mu'tazili influence around me, the position I hold, they may do takfir upon me and maybe rebel. This is one theory. So this is why he clamped down, trying to get everyone to say the Quran was makhluq, to come on board and therefore save himself. Again, Allah knows best. I'm sure there's other theories out there. That's one such theory. This is mentioned by Ahmed Rasyuni in his book Al-Salaf Mutakhayyal. He mentioned this position. I think I mentioned his name wrong maybe, but it's called Al-Salaf Mutakhayyal. If you Google it, you'll find the name of that book and the author. That's kind of the argument that he makes. But anyway, what's important to note is that a lot of the Mu'tazili scholars or people that held this position of Quran being makhluq were Hanafis. So therefore, when the Mihna begins in Baghdad and they are trying to get the scholars on board to say the Quran is makhluq, Imam Ahmed is the one who stands firm and says, nope, I'm not going to. That's because of Sabir al-Mihna. He was patient, meaning he held his ground. I'm not going to divert from my position. The Quran is ghayr makhluq. And so that causes a lot of stir, puts him in prison. He's lashed and goes through a lot of difficulties. And so this kind of why is the Mihna important? There's two things that come out from the Mihna. Number one is that the dislike, which you can say in Imam Shafi'i's lifetime, because the Mihna begins after his passing away, that there was a disagreement between the hadith scholars and many of the hadith scholars and Imam Abu Hanifa and the Hanafis, but it was sometimes harsh language. Usually it was more academic. But the mihna kind of exasperates this, because these people who are speaking in Abu Hanifa's name, claiming the Quran is makhluq, and even using the Khalifa to kind of establish this view, then this chasm, you can say this opposition between the muhaddithun on one side, if you want to use that term, and the Hanafis, who also know hadith, so they're not muhaddithun, but meaning what known as Ahlul Hadith, versus it gets wider, and that hatred, etc., gets worse. And you see at this time period where you have the very harsh critics of Imam Abu Hanifa, very harsh, and then you kind of get this peak of harshness against Imam Abu Hanifa and the Hanafis, and then later on it decreases, something that I believe that I noted in the first semester. So Imam Ahmed is in that time period where the emotions are very high, so there is a lot of negative remarks mentioned by Imam Ahmed towards Imam Abu Hanifa. Even in the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, it's an interesting point here, even within the Musnad of Imam Ahmed mentions a narration of a hadith in which Imam Abu Hanifa is the Rawi. And in that narration, he doesn't even want to mention Imam Abu Hanifa's name. He says in the Sanad, so and so from Abu Fulana. That's how he refers to him. Right? And then his son Abdullah says, my father said Abu Fulana, he meant by Imam Abu Hanifa. Right? He was not willing to even say his name. That's how much there was, you can say, the kind of enmity. And that's just honesty. Right? That's the reality. Even though we know that the Kitab al-Asl was something that impressed Imam Ahmed, but that's just the reality of it. But we can look back in historical context, in hindsight, and say, well, there was emotions high, and you can excuse such positions. The second thing to know about the mihna, of why it's quite important, is that there's a very good book written by Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, and he mentions that the mihna opened up a whole host of theological debates and intricacies. So for example, one is the Quran is ghayr makhluq. Okay, great. But then there was a further debate regarding what does it mean for the Quran to be ghayr makhluq? Are we saying that our recitation is ghayr makhluq, or is our recitation makhluq? This is a debate between alfaz being makhluq. Some say alfaz is makhluq. Some say alfaz is ghayr makhluq. Some are doing alfaz is either not makhluq or makhluq. It's doing tawaqquf. So therefore the muhaddithun start to go at each other. So famously Imam Bukhari is attacked. He has to write his book Khalqu Af'al al-Ibad to defend his creed, and some of the muhaddithun attack him, and then vice versa. So Shaykh al-Fattah Abu Ghudda goes that the mihna caused a lot of these kind of controversies and exasperated emotions, such that unfair criticism was mentioned to one another. So therefore, when a person is going through these some of the statements of criticism of one another, you have to know the context. You know the context, and then you can look back at it. So if someone says, for example, Imam Ahmed was anti-Abu Hanifa and he was right because Imam Ahmed is such a great Imam, you say, okay, fair enough, but let's look at the context, and the context to explain why he was like that, and why the scholars after Imam Ahmed, some centuries later, even the Hanbalis, they shifted the view about Imam Abu Hanifa, because you have hindsight, the actual views of Imam Abu Hanifa are more apparent to you, so you can get a more of a fair and unbiased perspective. So we'll move on to in the next session to the Hanbali method a bit more deeper. I just spent that last little segment talking about the mihna. That in this session we spoke a bit about Imam Shafi'i's rank amongst the muhaddithun, whether he was considered, what level he was at, and even his contribution, and specifically to the issue of jarh wa ta'deel. We also kind of delved into the topic of the basic structure of the Shafi'i madhab, right? And how we have this two schools, what is known as the Khurasani method and the Baghdadi method. The Baghdadi method being earlier, and they were considered by Imam Nawawi as being more precise when it comes to transmission of the madhab, and the Khurasani method being later, and this was more defined by their tahqiq and bahath, with the likes of Imam Jawayni's father, etc. in that, and the other school represented by the likes of Isfarayini, etc. So that's like the two tariqas, and then the two people that come and kind of bring all of this together and does tasheeh and corrects what they think is more correct is Imam al-Rafi'i and Imam al-Nawawi. So Imam Rafi, Imam Nawawi, and so there you get this principle within the Mutaakhirun Shafi'iyya that whenever Nawawi and Rafi agree, then that's the madhab. Right? Whenever Rafi and Nawawi agree, then that's the madhab. And thereafter, the two figures that he mentions, again, there's hundreds of figures, two figures that he mentions stand out after, which is for istiqraru madhab, the madhab kind of establishes is Ibn Hajar al-Haytami and al-Ramli, Shamsuddin al-Ramli. These two are the figures where you have istiqraru madhab. And I'm pretty sure over the last century or so, like I can talk about the Hanafi madhab, there's further developments, and that will probably be the case also in contemporary Shafi'i discourse. Then we kind of moved on with that very brief overview into the Imam Ahmed, and so we just spoke a bit about the Mihna and the relationship between Imam Ahmed and Imam Abu Hanifa, why it was so a soured relationship, even though he starts off in his very early age having a relationship with Imam Abu Yusuf. His remarks with Imam Abu Yusuf are much more softer, but when it comes to Imam Abu Hanifa, there's clearly a lot of harshness, and we explained that things like the Mihna, and there's other aspects. When we look at other aspects of the Hanbali madhab, you'll start to become clear why there is this opposition. But we look back at that and say, alhamdulillah, Imam Ahmad was an Imam, alhamdulillah, Imam Abu Hanifa was an Imam, and so they have their own methods. We look back and can praise both and understand at the same time, of course Imam Hanifa comes before, why Imam Ahmed, in his eyes, his criticism was justified. Despite that, the great efforts outdo any of the things that we disagree with. So who are we to try to pick holes in these great Imams? Just mention how the scholarly tradition reacted to that, of the consensus that we get to that Imam Hanifa is an Imam. But anyway, we'll touch upon that in the next session, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.